In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
Thanks, Lisa. Alex Pearl has lived a life as colorful as his stories. From his art college days, where he once accidentally set his lead actor on fire, to a successful advertising career, and now an award-winning author, Alex's journey is nothing short of fascinating. His work includes the Kindle bestseller Sleeping with Blackbirds, the psychological thriller The Chairman, and the comic murder mystery A Brand to Die For. He's also the author of 100 Ways to Write a Book, based on interviews with 100 writers. His latest is One Man Down, available now for pre-order and due in bookstores in March. Alex Pearl, welcome to the conversation.
Terry, very nice to meet you.
Without giving away too many spoilers, tell us about One Man Down.
One Man Down is the sequel to my previous book, Brand to Die For, which is set in 1983, and it's set against the advertising background in London, Soho, at that time, which I kind of know quite well because I lived through all that. So the great thing about writing these two books was that I didn't have to do any research, which I don't like doing. And I'm a bit of a lazy writer, and I just like getting on with it. So in both these cases, these two books, I was able to just spend my time developing a plot and then writing it and not having to do a great deal of research because that was all in my head. I'd lived through it. So yeah, the second book, One Man Down, features the same characters. It's a standalone book. You don't need to have read the first book, but it's kind of, it has the same two protagonists. These two guys. One is Brian Finkel, who's the art director, and he's the only child of two neurotic Jewish parents, and the other guy is the copywriter, who is Angus Lovejoy. And he's from a kind of fairly upper middle class kind of background. He went to public school. He's quite posh, but he's quite lazy, but he's quite clever and is quite sort of sharp. And the two of them are sort of two unlikely characters, but they sort of get on quite well, and they kind of seem to have an affinity, and then they produce some very sort of creative advertising campaigns. And at the same time, they get immersed in strange kind of murder mysteries that happen around them, which they think they're clever enough to solve, and they're not. And we go on a journey in both books, and hopefully, the dialogue and the situations make the reader laugh a bit, which I hope happens. But so yeah, that's basically kind of the story. And the interesting thing about the second book, which comes out in February, book actually, because what I tend to do in my books, I tend to, I don't know why, but I put people in who are real, who are no longer with us, who I knew personally, as a way of kind of paying tribute to them. Anyway, and in the recent book, there's a guy that I knew who very sadly died, and I think he was about 40. He was someone my brother was actually worked with. He was a barrister in London. But he wasn't a particularly good barrister. And in the evenings, he did what he was really good at, which was comedy. And he wrote comedy, and he performed, and he was actually really quite brilliant. I'd met him a couple of times, and he was a very nice guy, very amusing. And anyway, I featured him in my book. And I learned not that long ago, in fact, that when he was doing his farces, which he wrote these they're funny farces with long-winded titles. I think the title is The Farndale Townswomen Guild's Production of, like Macbeth and various other productions. And the premise of these things was that they all go disastrously wrong. I think it's an idea that's been stolen since, actually. But anyway, he wrote about 5 or 6 of these things, and he won awards at the Edinburgh Festival, and to which I went. Anyway, so I've got him in the book just as a way of sort of paying tribute to him. It just so happens I discovered that he actually used in his first production, among other people, someone who became quite famous, who was Julian Clary, the comedian. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a very camp, and he was very big in the 80s. Julian Clary was a big name. So I put Julian Clary into my book as a bit of fun. And then I realized, blimey, I've got to get permission. I can't just put him in. So I better contact his agent because, and I thought, well, he's probably not going to get back to me. But in the first instance, I sent him a tweet on Twitter, stupidly thinking that he would actually get back to me. And lo and behold, he actually did. I mean, about 20 seconds later, I can believe it. This guy's got, over 1 million followers and he's never heard of me, I'm sure. So he sent me, I said, I'd like to issue my book. And he said, he's just sent back a message that said, am I nice in it? Which I thought was quite funny. And I said, well, obviously he's open to this. So I sent his agent a long email about what it was all about. And then about 2 weeks later, he sent me a very nice reply saying, that's fine, Alex. As long as you don't use that line about me planting people in the audience, heaven forfend! ! So it kind of, he gave me permission, so I kept it in, and so I've got this book in which a live comedian actually appears, which is quite nice, really. So that makes it sort of a little bit unusual. But the book is set, as I said, in 1984, and there's a bit of background to the kind of stuff that was going on. We had the miners' strike in the UK and stuff like that. And there are things that will resonate with people who lived through the 80s. And also it was the pre-digital age. So in advertising, this is all before the advent of online digital, advertising and computers. So it was kind of interesting to sort of look at that period and, because people who, weren't familiar with it will be interested in it, and hopefully it's, there was a murder mystery in there somewhere, but there's also, I like going with amusing dialogue. So it's kind of dialogue driven and there's a little bit of a plot in there somewhere. So that's how I kind of go about sort of writing these things. So there's certainly these two anyway. And there's a third one in the mix, but I've been a bit lazy. So I've written a fantastic first chapter, which I like. And I've kind of put it down for 3 months, and I need to go back and start working that one up. But anyway, that's kind of a bit of background about the book. Yeah.
How long did it take you to write One Man Down?
That's a good question. One Man Down, took me a little longer than A Brand to Die For. The first one was actually really quick because that book was actually my brother's idea. He said to me one day, why didn't you write a book about all your advertising stuff? Because, and I thought, well, I was trying to avoid that because it was kind of, people try to do things that, aren't near where they're, aren't about themselves. And I thought it was almost self-indulgent and perhaps but then when I thought about it, I thought, well, actually, there's so many great stories that I can dredge up. And, and it was a great time to have lived through and to have been through that period. So I thought, actually, there might be something in that. And then the more I thought about it, and sort of I kind of had lots of conversation with my brother. I used him as a sounding board, and we had an idea, and it kind of took off. And then when I actually sat down and wrote that first book, it was remarkably quick. It was my quickest book. I wrote it, I think he said I wrote it in something like almost 2 months. It was really quick, which was crazy. Yeah? But I really enjoyed writing it. Hopefully that shows. I told a lot of people who read it, say they found it very funny. And the second book was a little bit longer, but not maybe it was something like, I don't know, I was a bit lazy because I tend to put things down and come back to them. So it was a few, 5 months or so, something like that. But the first one was really quick. But I'm very erratic, Terry. I'm not disciplined. I'm shambolic, and I don't abide by any particular rules, and I just go with the flow, as it were. But I enjoyed I enjoy my writing. But those two books, I think, were particularly enjoyable to write. They were a lot of fun.
How did an art student end up in advertising?
Well, that's a good question. My whole journey through life has been a sort of a series of accidents, really. I went to art school because I wasn't good at school. I was lousy. I wasn't a good student at all. I wasn't particularly academic. I was good at two things. I was good at drawing. I was quite good at writing, creative writing. So I kind of went to art school as I didn't know what to do. I thought, it'd be fun. I'd go to art school. Yeah, I can do a bit of that. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then when I was at art school, I teamed up with this guy, and it was a period that was kind of the golden age of advertising in the UK, really, in terms of creativity, and in America as well. And we got interested in advertising, and we met people, and we went to advertising agencies, and it just took off. And it was just quite an interesting. Yeah, we found it really interesting, and we got sort of slightly obsessed with it. And I suppose we just kind of, well, before the end of term, we were offered a job. We put together a portfolio of work, and we got into an agency, and it kind of took off from there. And it was, it was great. I mean, I didn't regret any of it. It was a terrific period to work in. And, we worked for, quite a few different agencies in London, and it was great. I mean, it did a lot of TV and stuff, and it was good fun. And I think the thing with advertising is that it's a lot of, well, quite a few writers have been through advertising, have learned their trade through it. And it's a kind of good training ground for writers, because it's, it teaches you how to write in short form and be concise with words. And I mean, I think the late Alan Parker, who also was a copywriter who went into films, he said that it was a fantastic training ground for him. And he learned his craft really by working as a writer. And then actually when he was at the agency, which was Collett Dickinson Pierce in London, to sell his commercials, he would then start filming little films that he could show to the client with people in the office as the actors. And he got really good at it. And the whole thing took off from there, because he found that during the, it would have been the 70s, I think, and he was presenting to clients these little films, and they would say, "Oh, it's great, go away and do it." And then in the end, the agency said, "Well, look, we'll set you up a studio, and you go and make the commercials and do it for real." And that's what happened. And then he started doing award-winning commercials, and then he went into feature films, and he shot, I think his first film was, I can't remember the name of it now, but it was a big film. It was really, really big, and then he went on and he did Bugsy Malone. I think that was his first film, and it took off from there. And he was really successful. But he always maintained that the advertising training was really invaluable to get that ball rolling. And I think it's the same for writers. I mean, a lot of writers have also made that leap, and it's just a good training ground, I think. Yeah.
Tell us the story behind that infamous theatrical production where your lead actor caught fire.
That was when I was at Maidstone College of Art, and I was studying graphic design and doing a bit of advertising as well. And I just thought it'd be quite a fun thing to set up a theatre company. What I hadn't quite realised was that all those people who were really interested in doing the same were complete nutcases. And one of them was, I won't name him, but he was an illustrator who was quite strange. And he decided that on the night he was going to do a fire-blowing act without really telling everybody, which, was very dramatic. But unfortunately, I think he'd had a few too many to drink in advance, and he wasn't quite aware what he was doing. And he blew this enormous flame, which actually made the entire front row of the auditorium scream, because they weren't expecting it. And then it kind of floated back onto his head, and in slow motion, his head kind of started, started in flames. And luckily, the pianist, who was, I think, if memory serves me right, I think his name was Bertram or Bart. He had the good sense to notice that there was a sort of flaming beacon nearby, and grabbed this blanket and wrapped it around his head and jumped on it. And I think probably saved the guy's life, actually. I don't know. But anyway, so that within minutes, someone had called the 999, which is the emergency number, and the whole load of ambulances came out. And I spent the next week apologizing to all the lecturers that it had nothing to do with me. But it was quite a memorable event. I don't think they ever did any other theatrical production after that.
For you, what is the most challenging part of writing a story like One Man Down?
Yeah, well, for me, I find the most challenging part the actual planning and writing down, working out the storyline. I mean, I'm always fascinated how other writers go about it. I mean, I find that really, really difficult. And I spend probably the longest part of the writing process trying to work that out. And I'm a planner rather than a pantser, as it were. Yeah, I need to know where I'm going and what, I need I need a concrete roadmap really to base it on. I mean, obviously when you write something down and you write a synopsis, once you start writing the real story, it will change a little bit. And some of the characters sometimes do things you don't expect. But by and large, in my case, the plan is fairly, pretty close to what you've written. The actual book will be quite close. And I really can't, write without that really. It's I really need to establish that. So I write quite a long synopsis usually. I say long, 5 or 6 pages, and I might do some kind of character notes and stuff like that. But I like to get, once I've got it in my head, then I can go off and start writing, and that's the enjoyable bit. But the planning I find very difficult. It was quite useful actually with the last 2 books. Talking to my brother, I used him as a sounding board. He was very good at story development, and he suggests things that I find quite helpful. It's interesting because a lot of writers now use AI as a sounding board as well, and which I've not tried, but I can understand that because it really does help. It's a bit like being in advertising when you have another partner to bounce ideas off. Otherwise, you're in a vacuum. It's really, really difficult. Because for me, the storyline is really important, and the ending is really important because I always want an ending that no one can see coming and is credible, and So yeah, the planning of the synopsis is I think the toughest thing for me. It's interesting because a lot of people I interviewed in my book about writing, I would say about 50% of them actually say that they don't like to plan, which I find amazing because I couldn't do it. That they kind of take the view that if you plan, it doesn't feel credible and all that, and that characters do things that are unpredictable, which I buy into that. But by the same token, I need to know where I'm going. Otherwise, so I'm stumbling around in the dark and it's terrifying. But maybe that's also the reflection on my background in advertising, where you kind of think of ideas and plan things, meticulously. Anyway, but I think we're all different, and so that's the way of the world, isn't it? But yeah, I find that part of the process, I have to say, the most challenging.
I found 100 Ways to Write a Book to be a fascinating textbook on the craft.
Yeah. Good. I enjoyed it. Yeah. Well, it was funny because I did that I wasn't thinking of actually publishing a book. I just did it as a COVID, as a way of just kind of finding out. It was just a personal exercise. I was interested in knowing how people go about it, and because it's just fascinating, isn't it? It's endlessly fascinating. And so I just did this thing, and it kind of took off. It took on a life of its own, really. And it only occurred to me later, once I had all these interviews on my website, I was like, bloody hell, there's a huge book here. I hadn't actually realized. So that's when I thought, oh yeah, but let's publish it, because it's great. As I said, it's interesting. But I think a lot of people have, like yourself, have found it interesting just to flip through. And also the nice thing is that you not only discover the way people approach it, but you also discover the other books that they like, and so you can learn a lot from it. There's a lot of kind of insights to be had, which I was pleased about. Yeah.
What do your readers say they like best about your fiction?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, well, every time I write, well, not every time, but I've written like 3 different kind of books. Really, the first book was a children's book. The second book was a kind of fairly serious, dark thriller. And then the last 2 have been sort of quite light comic, sort of, cozy mysteries, I suppose. So they're all a bit different. So I guess the readers who read the books have different things in mind. I mean, but I think I like it when people say that they find my books compelling at one level. And then the last 2, I like it when they say it's funny, because I kind of wanted them to laugh at some of the stuff in there. But I suppose ultimately you just want to tell a good story, don't you? And you want people to want to turn the page. And so, yeah, and it can be for any number of reasons. But I think they'll probably find, well, The Chairman was a very sort of different book because that's quite dark. But I think a lot of people who read that book couldn't put it down. So that was obviously nice to hear. I don't consciously kind of try and do things. I just try and write a good story, I think, and hopefully along the way, people pick up stuff that they find, really compelling. So, yeah.
So One Man Down, you have mentioned, has a sequel coming up.
Yeah.
You think that will be in circulation?
Well, that depends on how lazy I'm going to be. But I'm I'm hoping to get on with it this year. And I've got I have a plot actually for the book, which is kind of quite well formed there. But actually, I do need to do a little bit of research for that book. Actually, it involves I'm writing about art fraud in the mid '80s, and it's an area I need to familiarize myself a bit more with. I think I'm going to feature the art critic, there's a guy called Brian Sewell. I don't know if you've heard of him. And he was quite well known here. And he was quite a character. I think I might feature him because he was quite interesting. And it's basically going to be the same characters again and another story, and there'll be murder and there'll be some art fraud. And I think the art involved would be art stolen by the Nazis during the Second World War. There was an exhibition in Germany, which was it was called they were mocking modern art basically, and it was called degenerate art, I think, degenerate art, which Hitler had organised. So it was funny because they had two exhibitions that ran side by side. This was probably in the early 39, I think, probably. Anyway, one was for this degenerate art, and one was for the art that the Nazis thought was fantastic art. And of course, the exhibition that drew the most people was the first one, the degenerate, because people were intrigued, I suppose. I don't know, but anyway, but a lot of the art in that exhibition was destroyed later by the Nazis, but an awful lot of it was also stolen by some of them. And so my book will feature a painting by a little-known artist who was a woman, actually. And it's obviously in my book, it's not the original, but there's several fakes out there. And because a lot of those things were burnt. But so that's kind of the story hinges a bit on that. So it's a bit different to the others, but there's it's a different kind of crime going on. Of course, Brian, who is the art director, is a great expert on art. So that's also partly the reason I wanted to write about that.
How can people get in touch with you? What's your favorite way to communicate with your readers?
Well, the best way really is my email, which is alex@apearl.co.uk. Otherwise, I'm on social media, but the email's always a good one because I'll see it probably more readily.
It's called One Man Down. It is available for pre-order right now in the United States and the UK. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Not at all. It's been lovely to chat, Terry. Thank you very much for contacting me.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.